Information was the ultimate weapon in the medieval world, more powerful than any sword or siege engine. While kings and emperors appeared to rule from their thrones, real power flowed through hidden channels, a shadowy network of messengers carrying secrets that could make or break nations. These weren't just simple couriers, but a sophisticated web of communication so advanced it functioned like the medieval internet. Monasteries doubling as data centers, merchant spies smuggling intelligence alongside goods, and even trained pigeons acting as feathery email servers. This was the secret information highway that shaped history. Today we're pulling back the curtain on these extraordinary messenger networks that operated in plain sight, yet remained invisible to most. You'll discover how coded letters changed the fate of battles, why certain monks held more influence than nobles, and how a simple piece of parchment could travel faster than most armies. The truth about these medieval information systems will change how you see the entire era. By the end, you'll understand why controlling the message meant controlling kingdoms, and how these ancient networks laid surprising groundwork for our modern world of instant communication. The secrets of history's first internet start now. Now let's unravel just how these medieval messenger systems operated like an ancient internet. Think of them as the backbone of information exchange, connecting distant lands with a speed that defied the sluggish pace of the era. Just like today's digital networks, these systems relied on a web of relay points, monasteries, trading posts, and royal courier stations acting as medieval servers that stored and forwarded messages. Information didn't travel in a straight line. Instead, it hopped from one hub to another, much like data packets moving across the modern web. A letter from Paris to Constantinople might pass through the hands of monks, merchants, and diplomats, each adding another link in the chain. What made these networks truly powerful was their efficiency. While armies marched at a snail's pace, critical news could traverse continents in weeks, shaping decisions that altered the course of wars and trade. Kings and bankers didn't just rely on these networks, they depended on them. A delayed message could mean a lost throne, while an intercepted letter might spark a rebellion. This was an era where information wasn't just valuable, it was the lifeblood of empires. And just like our internet today, control over these networks meant control over power itself. The speed, secrecy, and reach of these systems made them the ultimate tool for those who knew how to wield them. To understand how medieval messenger networks became so powerful, we need to journey back even further, to the empires that first mastered the art of rapid communication. Long before monks and merchants formed their intricate webs, the groundwork was laid by ancient superpowers. The Romans, for instance, built the cursus publicus, a state-run courier system that stretched across their vast empire. Picture relay stations stocked with fresh horses and riders, ready to sprint messages from one end of Europe to the other. This wasn't just about speed. It was about control. Emperors used these networks to keep provinces in line, sending orders and receiving intelligence before rebellions could even take root. Meanwhile, in Persia, the royal road network operated with similar precision. Herodotus marveled at their efficiency, describing how riders could cover the distance from Susa to Sardis, nearly 1,800 miles, in just 9 days. That's a pace that would put most medieval systems to shame. What made these systems revolutionary was their structure. They weren't improvised, they were meticulously planned, with way stations placed at exact intervals to minimize delays. When the medieval world inherited these ideas, they didn't just copy them, they adapted. The collapse of Rome's central authority meant no single ruler could fund such an expansive system. Instead, networks became decentralized, woven into the fabric of monastic life and merchant guilds. Monasteries, with their scriptoriums and far-flung connections, became natural hubs. Merchants, always on the move, carried more than spices and silks, they smuggled secrets. What's fascinating is how these medieval societies took fragments of ancient systems and stitched them into something even more resilient. Where Rome relied on imperial might, the medieval world relied on collaboration and sometimes outright secrecy. The result, a shadowy, flexible network that no single king could fully control, yet everyone needed to survive. And that's where the real power lay. Now, let's turn our attention to the quiet corners of medieval Europe where monasteries, often seen as sanctuaries of prayer, secretly doubled as the backbone of communication. These weren't just places of worship, they were bustling hubs of information, with monks serving as the unsung heroes of the medieval messaging world. Picture this: inside dimly lit scriptoriums, monks meticulously copied texts, not just religious scriptures, but royal decrees, trade agreements, and even personal letters. Their scriptoriums became the medieval equivalent of data centers, preserving knowledge that might otherwise have vanished with time. But their role didn't stop at copying. Monks also acted as couriers, carrying these documents across vast distances. Thanks to their network of sister monasteries, a letter penned in England could find its way to Italy without ever passing through secular hands. What made monasteries so effective was their neutrality. Kings and nobles trusted them to relay messages without tampering, and their vow of poverty meant they were less likely to be bribed. Plus, their far-reaching connections spanned beyond political borders. A Benedictine monk in France could easily correspond with his order's branch in Germany, creating a web of communication that even the most powerful rulers couldn't replicate. But here's the twist: monasteries didn't just transmit information, they protected it. Some of the most sensitive messages were hidden in plain sight, encoded within religious texts or tucked into the bindings of illuminated manuscripts. For centuries, monks safeguarded secrets that shaped alliances, averted wars, and even decided the fate of crowns. And so, while knights and kings dominated the history books, it was often the humble monk, quill in hand, robe fluttering as he hurried down a muddy road, who truly held the threads of power. Their legacy wasn't just spiritual, it was the invisible network that kept Europe connected, one carefully inked parchment at a time. But what if the message needed to fly faster than a monk could walk? Enter the unsung heroes of speed, the carrier pigeons. While monasteries moved information steadily, pigeons delivered it in a flash. These feathered couriers were the medieval equivalent of high-speed internet, zipping across skies with urgent notes tied to their legs. The idea wasn't new. Ancient civilizations like the Egyptians and Romans used pigeons, but medieval Europe perfected it. Training a pigeon was no small feat. Breeders selected birds with unshakable homing instincts, then conditioned them through grueling exercises. Young pigeons were taken miles from their roosts and released, repeating the process until they could find home from hundreds of miles away. The best birds became prized assets, often housed in lavish dovecotes near castles or trading hubs. Their routes weren't random. Pigeons flew predictable paths between fixed points, usually a home base and a secondary location, like a battlefield or allied city. This made them perfect for wartime. During sieges, commanders relied on pigeons to send pleas for reinforcements or secret strategies. One well-timed message could mean the difference between surrender and victory. And the stakes were high. In 1284, the city of Damietta in Egypt held out against a crusader siege thanks to pigeons relaying orders from the Sultan. Centuries later, during the siege of Vienna in 1529, pigeons carried desperate appeals for aid that ultimately rallied Europe's defenses. These birds didn't just carry notes, they carried the fate of nations. Yet pigeons had their limits. They could only fly one way back to their home roost, and bad weather or predators could doom a mission. But when speed mattered most, nothing beat the humble pigeon, darting through storms and dodging hawks to deliver the words that shaped history. So next time you see a bird in flight, remember, centuries ago, its ancestors might have been the fastest, most reliable messengers on Earth, tiny feathered lifelines in a world desperate to stay connected. Now let's turn our attention to the bustling marketplaces and trade routes where merchants did far more than just sell goods. They moved secrets. While pigeons raced through the skies, traders quietly became the backbone of another kind of medieval internet, weaving a web of information across continents. Merchants were the perfect spies. Their constant travel between cities gave them cover. Who would suspect a harmless trader of carrying coded letters or whispered rumors? They knew the roads, the border crossings, and the right palms to Greece. And because commerce never stopped, neither did their flow of intelligence. Silk, spices, and silver weren't the only valuables in their caravans. Hidden among barrels of wine or bundles of cloth were messages that could shift political alliances or expose military plans. Some merchant families even built empires on information. Take the Medici of Florence, bankers by trade but masters of communication. Their network of agents stretched from London to Constantinople, relaying financial news that doubled as political leverage. A missed debt payment might hint at a kingdom's weakness, while a sudden loan could reveal an impending war. Money talked and merchants listened, but it wasn't just the wealthy elite. Ordinary peddlers played their part too. A humble wool merchant might carry a letter stitched into his coat lining, or a spice trader could memorize a verbal message to repeat at the next port. These unsung couriers were so vital that kings often granted them special protections, safe passage, reduced tolls, even armed escorts, because disrupting trade meant cutting off a vital information lifeline. And the risks immense. Caught with the wrong message, a merchant could lose everything: their cargo, their freedom, even their life. Rival lords planted spies among trading guilds, and intercepting a single courier could unravel an entire network. Yet the rewards outweighed the dangers. A well-placed tip about a grain shortage or an army's movement could earn a merchant fortunes in favors or gold. So next time you picture medieval markets, remember, behind every bargain and barter, there was often a hidden exchange of words that shaped kingdoms. Merchants didn't just move goods, they moved history. And speaking of hidden systems, our next stop takes us to the icy ports of Northern Europe, where an alliance of cities built one of the most sophisticated communication webs of the Middle Ages. But that's a story for another moment. Now, let's sail north to the icy waters of the Baltic and North Seas, where a league of merchant cities built something extraordinary. A communication network so efficient it rivaled the speed of modern email. The Hanseatic League wasn't just a trading alliance, it was a medieval powerhouse of information, stitching together ports and markets from London to Novgorod with a web of messengers, codes, and trusted agents. Picture this: a ship docks in Lubeck, its hull packed with Baltic timber and Russian furs. But tucked between the cargo is something far more valuable: a sealed letter detailing a rival king's embargo or a spike in grain prices in Bruges. Within days, that intelligence races across the League's relay stations, carried by horseback riders who knew every shortcut and safe house. By the time the ship unloaded, half a dozen cities had already adjusted their trades and treaties based on that single message. The Hanseatic system was ruthlessly organized. Their couriers, known as Hanseatic postmen, weren't just fast, they were unstoppable. Snow, bandits, even wars couldn't delay their dispatches. These men rode day and night, swapping horses at prearranged inns where fresh mounts stood ready, and the League enforced brutal penalties for anyone interfering. Attack a Hanseatic courier, and your entire town might face a trade blockade, economic warfare in an age before sanctions. But speed wasn't their only trick. The League mastered encryption too. Merchant guilds used cipher ledgers where numbers disguised names, and wax seals hid tiny notches to verify authenticity. A Copenhagen fish trader might receive what looked like a routine invoice, but the dots under certain letters spelled out a warning: Danzig's harbor is closed. What made this network so revolutionary was its scale. At its peak, the Hanseatic League linked over 200 cities, all synchronized like clockwork. When a plague outbreak shut down Hamburg's docks, Riga knew within the week to reroute its flax shipments. When English wool taxes spiked, Hanseatic merchants in Pigeon stockpiled ahead of the surge. This wasn't just gossip, it was early data-driven decision-making, medieval style, and here's the twist: the League's messages didn't just move goods. They moved armies. In 1487, when Denmark's king threatened Hanseatic ships, a coded plea for help flew from Tallinn to Gdansk. Within a month, 70 warships funded by merchant gold assembled to crush the Danish fleet. No king ordered that mobilization. It was the work of a messaging network that could outmaneuver kingdoms. So while knights and castles dominate medieval tales, remember, the real power often lay in the hands of men with ink-stained fingers and fast horses. The Hanseatic League proved that in the Game of Thrones, information wasn't just power, it was profit, protection, and sometimes survival. And as this web of whispers thrived, another empire was perfecting its own postal mastery, one with relay stations so precise, messages crossed continents faster than arrows. But that's a story for another moment. Now, let's step into the shadow of castles and thrones, where speed and secrecy weren't just tools of trade, they were matters of life and death. While merchants like the Hanseatic League moved goods and gossip, royal couriers were the lifelines of kings, carrying messages that could spark wars or seal alliances. These weren't just ordinary riders, they were the elite sworn to loyalty, armed with privileges and often racing against treachery. Imagine a horseman galloping through a storm, his cloak soaked but the sealed parchment in his satchel bone dry. That letter might contain a queen's plea for military aid or a plot to overthrow a duke. Royal couriers were chosen for their endurance and discretion, often rising from minor nobility or veteran soldiers. Their status came with perks: immunity from tolls, the right to demand fresh horses from any village, and even the authority to impress local guides at sword point if roads were unsafe. But privilege had its price. Intercepting a royal courier was a favorite tactic of rival lords. Ambushes were common, and some messengers carried duplicate letters, one decoy, one real, strapped to their body or hidden in a saddlebag. In 1513, a French courier famously swallowed a coded dispatch when captured by Spanish troops, choosing torture over betrayal. For kings, losing a message could mean losing a kingdom. The most critical missions went to diplomatic runners who didn't just deliver letters, they negotiated. These were often scribes or knights trained to read faces as well as words. A skilled runner might adjust terms on the spot if a duke seemed hesitant, or sweeten an offer with promises of land or gold. Their reports back to the throne could shape entire policies. After all, a messenger who described a rival monarch as confident versus desperate might steer their own king toward war or peace. Speed was measured in blood. In England, Henry II's couriers could cover 200 miles in 4 days, a pace that killed horses and left men hollow-eyed. The Byzantine Empire's relay system was even faster, with stations every 20 miles where fresh riders waited like a baton-passing team. But the risks were brutal. Snowdrifts, bandits, or a simple wrong turn could doom a mission. Some royal families employed identical twin couriers. If one brother fell, the other might still reach the destination unnoticed. And here's what set royal messages apart: the art of the unspoken. Seals weren't just wax, they were psychological weapons. A letter bearing a king's personal signet might intimidate a rebellious baron into submission before it was even opened. Colors mattered too. Gold thread in the seal meant favor, black wax signaled a threat. One surviving letter from the Holy Roman Empire has tiny pinpricks under certain words, a code warning the recipient to read between the lines. Yet for all their skill, these couriers were ghosts in history's margins. We remember the kings who sent the orders, not the men who carried them. But next time you see a modern diplomat speed dialing a secure line, remember, 600 years ago, their job was done by someone with a horse, a dagger, and the courage to outride the darkness. And while kings relied on human riders, another empire was turning to the skies using feathers instead of hooves to outpace their enemies. But that's a tale for another moment. But kings and couriers weren't the only ones playing this high-stakes game of information. Those who carried the messages also had to outwit the enemies trying to steal them, and that's where the art of secrecy took center stage. Hidden beneath wax seals and parchment lay an even deeper layer of protection codes and ciphers designed to turn words into unreadable puzzles for anyone but the intended recipient. Picture this: a medieval spy scrawls a message, but instead of plain words, he substitutes each letter for another using a cipher wheel, a rotating disk that scrambles the alphabet. To the untrained eye, it's gibberish, but the recipient, holding an identical wheel, twists it until the letters click into place, revealing the truth. This wasn't some niche trick. Even Julius Caesar used a version of it, shifting letters by 3 places in the alphabet. His name, Caesar, would become FDHVDU to prying eyes. Simple yet deadly effective, but medieval codes went far beyond letter swaps. Some messages used invisible ink made from lemon juice or milk, which only darkened when held over a flame. Others employed nulls and meaningless symbols mixed into the text to confuse interceptors. One famous example from Venice involved a sheet of parchment covered in random numbers. The real message, only the numbers divisible by 3 held meaning, and even then, they corresponded to words in a prearranged book. Without the key, it was just a page of chaos. And then there were the languages of the shadows. The Cathars, a religious group hunted in France, developed their own secret script to communicate under persecution. Jewish merchants, often barred from official postal systems, wrote in code switches between Hebrew and local dialects to cloak sensitive trade deals. Even monasteries, those seemingly open libraries of knowledge, had their own shorthand symbols for recording forbidden ideas without attracting the church's wrath. The most sophisticated systems belonged to kings and popes. The Vatican's cipher office, staffed by mathematicians, created codes so complex they took days to crack even with a key. A single letter from the Borgia family might hide 5 layers of encryption, names replaced by numbers, dates written backward, and critical words buried in seemingly innocent phrases. One intercepted letter from Spain to its ambassador in England contained a recipe for quince preserves unless you knew to read every 3rd word, which revealed troop movements along the French border. Yet for all their cleverness, these systems had one fatal flaw: human error. A single misplaced symbol, a reused cipher, or a drunk scribe could unravel everything. In 1526, the Duke of Milan's entire spy network collapsed because his master cipher was stolen not by force, but by a bribed clerk who memorized the key. And sometimes the very act of sending a coded message was a giveaway. Why would a merchant bother encrypting a note about wool prices unless he was hiding something far darker? So the next time you type a password or send a secure message, remember, you're walking in the footsteps of medieval spies who turned ink and parchment into weapons. Their methods might seem crude today, but their goal was the same: to keep the wrong eyes from seeing what they shouldn't. And speaking of unseen players in this game of shadows, there's one group history often overlooks: the women who moved secrets under the radar. Yet history's silent movers often worked in plain sight. While kings and spies dominated the spotlight, women wove themselves into the fabric of medieval messenger networks with ingenious subtlety. Noble women, for instance, were the perfect conduits. Their letters, sealed with family crests, slid past suspicion who would ransack a duchess's ribbon-tied correspondence about embroidery patterns. But between those polite lines, they smuggled battle plans, inheritance disputes, even warnings of assassinations. Elena of Aquitaine famously used her daughter's wedding festivities to shuttle coded messages between rebellious barons, all while hosting a feast. Peasant women, though, mastered true invisibility. A basket of eggs could hide a scrap of parchment. A lullaby hummed at a market stall might relay a rebel's location through prearranged lyrics. In occupied territories, midwives moved freely between villages, carrying childbirth supplies and military intelligence. One account from the 100 Years' War describes a French laundress who stitched troop movements into the hems of noble shirts, leaving English occupiers none the wiser. Then there were the religious women. Nuns, shielded by convent walls, ran scriptoriums where forbidden texts were copied and altered. A psalter's decorative border might conceal a map of secret routes. Abbesses like Hildegard of Bingen even developed their own symbols, blending musical notation with coded instructions for allied monasteries. And in Islamic courts, female scribes in the harem penned poetry that doubled as diplomatic correspondence, their elegant calligraphy masking alliances between sultans. But perhaps the boldest operators were the merchant widows. Denied their husbands' trades by law, they leveraged their social limbo to transport more than silks and spices. A Venetian widow's mourning veil could drape over smuggled blueprints of enemy ships. In Constantinople, linen sellers, mostly women, used their guilds' trade routes to spread news of political purges faster than any imperial courier. These women didn't just carry messages, they reshaped them. A peasant courier might forget a lord's order to raise taxes, buying her village time to hide grain. A noblewoman's misplaced letter could spark a duel between rival factions, diverting attention from a real conspiracy. Their power lay in being underestimated until the moment they chose not to be. And as we turn to the roads crawling with pilgrims, you'll see how even sacred journeys hid a darker purpose. Now let's step onto the dusty roads where faith and espionage walked hand in hand. Pilgrims, those seemingly humble travelers seeking salvation, were the ultimate cover for covert communication. Their sacred vows granted them something priceless: unquestioned passage through war zones, rival territories, and even plague-stricken regions. Who would dare stop a penitent on their way to Jerusalem or Santiago de Compostela? Take the Canterbury Tales, for example. Chaucer's colorful characters weren't just swapping stories, they were exchanging real-world gossip that could shift alliances. A merchant pilgrim might whisper about Venetian ship movements between prayers. A friar could smuggle a bishop's sealed plea for military aid inside his hymnal. Even the poorest travelers had value beggars memorized messages, repeating them verbatim at way stations like living parchment. But the real masters were the professional pilgrims. These were not devout wanderers but hired couriers disguised in sackcloth. Wealthy families and monarchs paid them to undertake pilgrimages, their cloaks lined with hidden compartments for letters or coded scrolls. One account from the Crusades describes a so-called hermit whose walking staff unscrewed to reveal a map of Saracen fortifications. Another tells of a group returning from Rome with wax-sealed pardons and a list of excommunicated nobles ripe for blackmail. Relics, too, became tools of the trade. A pilgrim bringing home a saint's finger bone might actually be transporting a noble's last will tucked into the reliquary. In Spain, Muslim spies posing as Christian pilgrims used donated alms boxes to smuggle silver, and troop deployments across the Reconquista frontier. Perhaps the boldest scheme involved the Templars. Their network of pilgrim hospices doubled as intelligence hubs, where travelers' tales were meticulously recorded and forwarded to commanders. A knight might hear a German pilgrim's lament about bandits on the Rhine, and suddenly Templar garrisons would shift to intercept those very thieves, weeks before any official warning could arrive. Pilgrims didn't just carry secrets, they were the original crowdsourced news network. Their footsteps connected monasteries, markets, and military outposts, turning every shrine into an accidental post office. And as we'll soon see, another group leveraged their diaspora with even greater precision: the Jewish merchant networks, whose connections spanned further than any medieval ruler's reach. Now let's turn our attention to a group whose influence stretched far beyond borders: the Jewish merchant networks of the Middle Ages. Scattered across Europe, North Africa, and the Middle East, these traders had something rulers desperately needed: an unrivaled web of trust and connectivity that ignored political divisions. While kings and nobles were locked in feuds, Jewish merchants moved freely between Christian and Muslim lands, speaking multiple languages and maintaining family ties across continents. Their business dealings required reliable communication, and they built a system so efficient it put royal couriers to shame. Need to send a message from Cordoba to Cologne. A Jewish trader could get it there faster than any mounted courier, passing it through a chain of trusted associates along established trade routes. These networks weren't just about speed, they pioneered early forms of financial encryption. Bills of exchange, essentially medieval checks, contained coded information about shipments, political unrest, or even military movements. A seemingly innocent note about wool prices might reference troop movements through numerical ciphers known only to certain families. One remarkable example comes from the Cairo Geniza, a trove of medieval documents. Letters reveal how a merchant in Alexandria received word of a famine in Sicily through his cousin in Tunis weeks before grain ships were diverted to capitalize on rising prices. Another details how a banking family in Venice used rhyming Hebrew verses to confirm the authenticity of messages, ensuring rivals couldn't forge their correspondence. Jewish traders also served as unofficial diplomats. When the Holy Roman Emperor needed to secretly negotiate with the Almohad Caliphate, he turned to a Jewish spice merchant as his intermediary. Without flags or fanfare, these businessmen brokered treaties in back rooms, their neutrality making them indispensable, but their greatest advantage was sheer reach. A message could travel from Baghdad to Barcelona by hopping between Jewish communities in Damascus, Crete, and Marseille, each stop adding local intelligence like a medieval version of a data packet. By the time a letter reached its destination, it often came with unsolicited but critical updates: which ports were blockaded, which nobles were in debt, even whispers of impending betrayals. This diaspora-driven system was so effective that monarchs often tried to co-opt it. Some expelled Jewish communities only to beg them back years later when their own messaging systems faltered. Others, like Frederick II of Sicily, granted Jewish merchants special protections, not out of tolerance, but because their network was the empire's nervous system. As we'll see next, while the Byzantines built an official postal empire, it was these informal, trust-based networks that truly wove the medieval world together. Now let's step into the world of the Byzantines, where messengers didn't just carry letters, they moved with the precision of a well-oiled machine. While Western Europe relied on patchwork networks, the Byzantine Empire built something far more advanced, a state-run postal system that operated like clockwork. At its heart was the Cursus Publicus, a courier service so efficient it could make modern delivery apps jealous. Operated by the imperial government, this system wasn't just for official letters, it was the backbone of military strategy and administration. Need to send urgent troop orders from Constantinople to the frontier, a relay of riders stationed at carefully spaced outposts could cover hundreds of miles in days, swapping horses at each stop to maintain blistering speed. What set the Byzantines apart was their infrastructure. While others depended on merchants or monks, they maintained dedicated way stations called mutations and mansions. The mutations were simple horse-swapping posts allowing fresh mounts every 10 to 15 miles. The mansions were larger, offering food and lodging for riders traveling long distances. This meant messages could travel non-stop, day and night, outpacing anything in the fragmented kingdoms of the West. The system wasn't just fast, it was secure. Riders carried official seals, and tampering with imperial correspondence was punishable by death. Military dispatches often used coded language, ensuring that even if intercepted, they were useless to enemies. One surviving record describes how a general in Anatolia received an encrypted update on enemy troop movements within 48 hours, a feat unimaginable elsewhere in medieval Europe. But speed came at a cost. Running this network was staggeringly expensive, funded by heavy taxes, and maintained by a small army of bureaucrats. Only the wealthiest and most centralized state could afford it, which is why Western European kingdoms, drowning in feudal disputes, never replicated it. The Byzantines' ability to move information at such scale gave them a critical edge until their empire began to crumble. As we'll see next, while the Islamic world took inspiration from this system, they adapted it into something even more far-reaching. The Byzantines may have perfected the art of the imperial courier, but others would take the idea further. While the Byzantines set the gold standard for imperial courier networks, the Islamic world took the concept and expanded it beyond anything Europe had seen. Enter the Barid system, the backbone of communication across the vast Islamic caliphates. Unlike the Byzantine model, which served a centralized empire, the Barid had a far more ambitious mission, tying together a sprawling, multi-continental realm that stretched from Spain to India. At its peak, this state-run network was nothing short of revolutionary. Imagine a messenger system so reliable that a letter could travel from Damascus to Cordoba in under 2 weeks, a distance of over 2,000 miles. The secret lay in its meticulously planned relay stations, placed along major trade and military routes. Each station kept fresh horses, supplies, and dedicated couriers ready to sprint the next leg of the journey, day or night. But speed wasn't the only marvel. The Barid also mastered security. Couriers carried sealed official documents, often written in code, and tampering with them was a crime punishable by severe penalties. Some caliphs even used the system for espionage, embedding spies among the couriers to gather intelligence from distant provinces. One famous account describes how Harun al-Rashid, the legendary Abbasid caliph, received daily updates from his governors, some as far away as North Africa, allowing him to rule with an almost real-time grasp of his empire. What set the Barid apart was its adaptability. While the Byzantine system relied on heavy state funding, the Islamic version often incorporated local resources, from merchant caravans to pilgrim routes. This made it more flexible and cost-effective, capable of adjusting to the diverse landscapes and cultures under Islamic rule. In desert regions, camels replaced horses. Mountainous areas used runners trained to navigate treacherous paths. The system wasn't just fast, it was built to endure. Yet the Barid's true legacy wasn't just in moving messages, it transformed governance. By knitting together such a vast territory, it allowed the caliphs to project power like never before. Tax revenues could be collected efficiently, rebellions were crushed before they spread, and innovations in science, medicine, and law traveled swiftly across borders. For centuries, this network kept the Islamic world ahead of its rivals until new technologies and political shifts began to change the game. Speaking of rivals, while the Islamic and Byzantine systems dominated the East and South, Northern Europe was developing its own unique web of communication, one built not by emperors but by merchants. The Hanseatic League's trading empire would soon prove that commerce and communication were two sides of the same coin. Now, let's pull back the curtain on the shadowy world of medieval spycraft, where messenger networks weren't just about delivering letters. They were battlegrounds for information warfare. In an age where a single message could tip the balance of power, intercepting or sabotaging rival couriers became a high-stakes game of deception and strategy. One of the most common tactics was simple but effective: bribery. Rulers and rival factions often targeted low-paid couriers or relay station keepers, offering them gold or favors in exchange for sneak peeks at sealed dispatches. A well-placed bribe could reveal troop movements, expose secret alliances, or even delay critical messages long enough to change the course of a battle. Then there were ambushes, brutal and calculated. Forests, mountain passes, and lonely stretches of road became ideal spots to ambush messengers. Armed bands hired by rival lords would lie in wait, snatching pouches of letters or silencing couriers permanently. Some kingdoms even deployed their own counter-couriers, disguised as ordinary travelers, to shadow and intercept enemy messengers before they reached their destinations. But perhaps the most cunning trick of all was the art of the counterfeit message. Skilled scribes could forge seals and handwriting with startling accuracy, slipping false orders into enemy networks. Imagine a rival lord receiving a fake command to retreat his armies, or a city being tricked into surrendering based on a fabricated letter. Some spies went further, planting deliberate misinformation to sow chaos, like spreading rumors of a plague outbreak to disrupt trade or troop reinforcements. And let's not forget the role of double agents. Loyalty was a fluid concept in medieval espionage. Couriers themselves sometimes switched sides, either for personal gain or under threat. There are accounts of messengers deliberately losing critical letters or misreading routes to delay deliveries, all while feeding secrets to the highest bidder. What made these tactics so devastating was their ripple effect. A single intercepted message could unravel years of diplomacy, spark rebellions, or doom entire cities. Yet for all their ruthlessness, these methods also sparked innovations in security, like complex ciphers, tamper-proof seals, and even hostage exchanges to guarantee a courier's loyalty. This shadow war between messengers and spies reminds us that in the medieval world, information wasn't just power, it was survival. And as we'll see next, some of these intercepted messages didn't just change battles, they changed history itself. Now, let's step into the pages of history where a single parchment or whispered word altered destinies. Some messages carried by these medieval networks didn't just deliver news, they rewrote the future. Take, for instance, the infamous Pope's letter of the year 1084. When Pope Gregory VII excommunicated Holy Roman Emperor Henry IV, the message didn't just travel from Rome to Germany, it ignited a political earthquake. The Pope's words stripped Henry of legitimacy, turning allies into rebels and forcing the emperor to famously kneel in the snow at Canossa, begging for forgiveness. Without that courier's swift ride, Europe's power struggle might have unfolded very differently. Then there's the heart-stopping message that saved Vienna in the year 1529. As the Ottoman army surrounded the city, a lone runner slipped through enemy lines with a plea for help. His successful delivery rallied reinforcements just in time, turning the tide of the siege and preventing the Ottomans from advancing deeper into Europe. That one sprint through danger didn't just save a city, it reshaped a continent. But not all decisive messages were about war. Consider the quiet yet revolutionary scholar's packet carried by monks across Europe in the 12th century. These bundles of translated Arabic texts rescued from libraries in Spain and the Middle East contained lost works of Aristotle and groundbreaking medical treatises. Their delivery to universities like Paris and Bologna sparked the Renaissance, proving that knowledge, too, could be a world-changing message. And who could forget the burned letter that doomed a queen? In the year 1586, Mary, Queen of Scots, sent a coded note approving an assassination plot against England's Elizabeth I. Intercepted and deciphered by Elizabeth's spies, it became the smoking gun that sent Mary to the executioner's block. A single piece of paper carried by a trusted hand sealed a monarch's fate. These stories remind us that behind every great turning point in history, there was often a messenger braving storms, bandits, and betrayal to deliver the words that moved empires. And as we'll soon see, even the mightiest of these networks couldn't outrun the winds of change forever. But as powerful as these medieval messenger networks were, even the most sophisticated systems couldn't last forever. The very forces that once fueled their rise eventually sowed the seeds of their decline. One of the biggest blows came with the invention of the printing press in the 15th century. Suddenly, information could be duplicated and spread far beyond the reach of handwritten letters or whispered dispatches. Books, pamphlets, and newspapers began circulating widely, reducing the need for couriers to carry every piece of news by hand. Knowledge was no longer confined to the elite. It was becoming a public commodity, and the old messenger networks struggled to keep up. Political upheaval also played a crucial role. As medieval kingdoms fractured into smaller, warring states, the once unified routes that messengers relied on became dangerous or impassable. Borders shifted, alliances crumbled, and traveling through hostile territory turned into a gamble. Where once a royal courier could ride unchallenged across vast empires, now they faced bandits, rival factions, and crumbling infrastructure. The very chaos that made messages more vital also made delivering them nearly impossible. Then there was the sheer cost. Maintaining relay stations, feeding horses, and paying skilled riders demanded vast resources. As economies faltered during periods of plague and war, many rulers could no longer afford their elaborate postal systems. Some turned to cheaper alternatives, like relying on merchants or pilgrims to carry messages informally. Others simply let their networks decay, leaving vital communications to chance. But perhaps the final nail in the coffin was technology itself. By the 17th century, innovations like the telescope and improved road networks allowed for faster, more efficient communication. Standing armies developed their own signaling systems, using flags and fires to send messages across battlefields in minutes. The world was speeding up, and the medieval messenger, once the swiftest link between distant powers, became a relic of a slower age. Yet, even as these networks faded, their legacy lived on. The idea of organized, rapid communication had taken root, setting the stage for everything from national postal services to the digital age. And that's a story that's still unfolding today. Yet, even as the old networks faded into history, their influence never truly disappeared. The need for rapid, secure communication is as urgent today as it was in the medieval world, and the parallels between then and now are striking. Think of the internet as the modern equivalent of those sprawling messenger networks. Just as medieval kings relied on couriers to deliver urgent dispatches across continents, today we send emails, texts, and video calls in seconds. The speed may be unimaginably faster, but the purpose remains the same: connecting people across vast distances in real time. And just like the medieval world, secrecy is still a top priority. Medieval messengers used coded letters and hidden compartments to protect sensitive information. Today, we encrypt our messages with complex algorithms, shielding them from hackers and spies. The tools have evolved, but the game of cat and mouse between those sending secrets and those trying to intercept them hasn't changed at all. Consider how modern corporations and governments build their own communication networks, mirroring the private courier systems of medieval merchants and monarchs. Tech giants lay undersea cables to control data flow, much like the Hanseatic League once dominated trade routes to control information. The players may be different, but the strategy is eerily familiar. Even the vulnerabilities are the same. Medieval messengers faced bandits and rival spies. Today, cyber attacks and data breaches threaten our digital highways. The risks have just shifted from physical ambushes to virtual ones, but here's the most fascinating part: the human element hasn't budged. Whether it's a medieval monk painstakingly copying a letter or a team of engineers securing a server farm, the drive to communicate quickly and safely is wired into us. The methods may keep advancing, but the core challenge remains: how to move information faster, farther, and more securely than ever before. And if history is any guide, that race is never truly over. As long as there are secrets to keep and messages to send, innovation will keep pushing the boundaries of what's possible. The medieval internet may be gone, but its spirit lives on in every fiber optic cable and encrypted chat. The more things change, the more they stay the same. But let's take a step back and look at the nuts and bolts of these medieval messenger networks. What made them so effective? It wasn't just the people, it was the clever tools and systems they built to move information at unprecedented speeds for their time. Relay stations were the backbone of these networks. Picture this: couriers didn't have to ride for days without rest. Instead, they'd stop at strategically placed stations along major routes, swapping their exhausted horse for a fresh one and handing off messages to a new rider. This relay system meant dispatches could travel hundreds of miles in just a few days, a staggering feat for the era. The Mongols perfected this with their yam system, where stations were spaced a day's ride apart, keeping their empire tightly connected. Then there were the horses themselves, specially bred for endurance and speed. Courier steeds weren't the heavy war horses of knights. They were lean, fast, and could cover grueling distances without breaking down. The Byzantines even had breeds imported from Arabia and Central Asia, prized for their stamina. And let's not forget ships. In places like Venice or the Hanseatic League, merchant vessels doubled as message carriers, speeding news across seas and rivers faster than any rider could. But the real genius lay in the little details. Messengers carried lightweight, waterproof cases to protect scrolls from rain or river crossings. Some used hollowed-out staffs or hidden compartments in clothing to smuggle secret letters past prying eyes. And in mountainous regions like the Alps, networks of signal fires or mirror flashes could relay warnings or announcements in minutes, a medieval version of instant messaging. Perhaps the most surprising innovation: standardized routes and schedules. Just like modern mail services, the best messenger systems operated on strict timetables. Byzantine couriers, for example, had set departure times, and delays were punished harshly. This predictability meant rulers could actually plan around how long it would take news to arrive, a luxury we take for granted today. What's remarkable is how these innovations weren't isolated. They spread and improved over centuries, borrowed and refined by empires and merchants alike. The same way today's tech builds on past breakthroughs, medieval communication was a game of constant upgrades, one swift horse, one relay station, one clever hiding spot at a time. But behind the efficiency and innovation of these medieval messenger networks lurked a darker reality, one of deception, espionage, and high-stakes betrayal. Imagine a world where every letter carried the potential to be a fake. Every courier might be a spy, and intercepted messages could change the course of wars. This was the shadow game played by kings, merchants, and rival factions, turning these communication highways into battlegrounds of intrigue. Forged documents were one of the oldest tricks in the book. A cleverly altered letter could misdirect armies, sabotage alliances, or even frame innocent people. During the 100 Years' War, both the English and French routinely intercepted and tampered with each other's dispatches, planting false orders that led troops into ambushes. Some rulers employed expert scribes whose sole job was to mimic handwriting so precisely that even the recipient couldn't spot the deception. Then there were the double agents, couriers, who secretly worked for both sides. These men were prized for their access to sensitive information, and their loyalties were often up for sale. In the Byzantine Empire, it wasn't uncommon for messengers to accept bribes to lose critical letters or deliver them to the wrong hand. The stakes were so high that some rulers resorted to brutal measures, like the Ottoman Sultan Mehmed II, who reportedly executed messengers caught carrying conflicting orders to his generals just to root out leaks. Interception was another constant threat. Bandits might ambush a courier for profit, but rival states set up elaborate traps along known routes. The Venetians, masters of maritime espionage, had fast scouting ships patrolling the Adriatic to snatch messages from rival merchant vessels. On land, lookouts would monitor mountain passes or river crossings, ready to ambush riders carrying sealed pouches. Some kingdoms even employed codebreakers, medieval cryptographers who could crack simple ciphers, turning stolen letters into intelligence goldmines. Perhaps the most insidious tactic was the deliberate spread of disinformation. A ruler might send a fake message, knowing it would be intercepted, to mislead enemies about troop movements or alliances. During the Crusades, false rumors spread by messengers often caused panic or misplaced defenses, leaving cities vulnerable. In one notorious case, a forged letter supposedly from the Pope sparked infighting among the Knights Templar, weakening them just before a critical battle. What's chilling is how little separated a trusted courier from a traitor. Loyalty was fragile, and the temptation to sell secrets was ever present. These networks, designed to connect empires, became tangled webs of trust and treachery, where a single compromised messenger could topple a kingdom. It's a reminder that even in the medieval world, information wasn't just power, it was a weapon. Now, let's step into a brighter side of these messenger networks, where secrets weren't the only things traveling vast distances. Beyond espionage and forged letters, these intricate systems became invisible highways for something far more enduring: culture. Picture a medieval world where art, science, and ideas could leap across kingdoms, carried not by armies or merchants alone, but by the very couriers who moved in the shadows of power. Take the monastic networks, for example. Monasteries weren't just way stations for messages, they were treasure troves of knowledge. Monks painstakingly copied ancient texts, preserving everything from Greek philosophy to Arabic medicine. When these manuscripts traveled along messenger routes, they didn't just spread words, they spread revolutions in thought. A single book carried from Baghdad to Paris could introduce new astronomical theories or medical practices, reshaping entire fields of study. Then there were the merchants who did more than trade spices and silk. Alongside their goods, they smuggled ideas. A Persian carpet might arrive in Venice with intricate geometric patterns that inspired local artists. A Jewish trader from Cordoba could bring scrolls explaining algebra, a concept then unknown in Northern Europe. Even pilgrims trudging to holy sites became accidental cultural ambassadors, swapping folk tales, recipes, and music with every innkeeper and fellow traveler along the way. The Hanseatic League's vast trade network didn't just move cargo, it moved customs. German baking techniques found their way to Scandinavia. Dutch shipbuilding methods reached the Baltic. And with every exchange, languages evolved, blending at the edges. A Hanseatic merchant might return home with not just profits, but a handful of foreign phrases that would eventually seep into local dialect. Perhaps most fascinating was the role of royal courts. Diplomats and their messengers didn't just negotiate treaties, they brought entire artistic movements in their retinues. A Byzantine scribe could introduce illuminated manuscript styles to a French court. A Mongol envoy might share Chinese paper-making techniques with Persian scholars. Even fashion trends spread this way, styles of dress, armor, or jewelry hopping from one elite circle to another, redefining luxury across continents. Music, too, traveled on these networks. Troubadours and minstrels often hitched rides with merchant caravans or diplomatic escorts, carrying songs from Provence to England or from Andalusia to Sicily. A melody born in a Moorish palace could end up reimagined in a Norman castle, all because a messenger's route crossed the right path at the right time. And let's not forget the scientific breakthroughs. When Arab scholars translated and expanded on Greek texts, their works didn't stay confined to libraries. Messengers carried them to European universities, sparking the Renaissance. The astrolabe, a marvel of Islamic engineering, spread across Europe this way, revolutionizing navigation. Even something as simple as a new crop like citrus fruits or sugar could transform diets and economies when introduced through these channels. What's remarkable is how accidental much of this exchange was. A messenger delivering a warlord's ultimatum might also unwittingly deliver a new musical instrument. A spy smuggling coded letters could be the reason a painter in Florence suddenly started using a foreign pigment. These networks, built for control and secrecy, became the veins through which the lifeblood of culture flowed, connecting minds as much as kingdoms. So while we remember the intrigue and betrayals, let's not overlook this quieter legacy. Every time a medieval messenger set out on horseback or boarded a ship, they weren't just carrying words, they were stitching together the fragmented tapestry of a continent, one idea at a time. But history isn't the only thing that remembers these messengers. Myth and legend have immortalized them in ways that blur the line between fact and fantasy. Across medieval Europe and beyond, couriers and runners became the stuff of folklore, their real exploits embellished with supernatural twists or heroic exaggerations. These tales didn't just entertain, they shaped how societies viewed the very idea of communication, turning messengers into symbols of loyalty, speed, and even divine intervention. Take the legendary figure of the Hulk from Slavic folklore. Said to be a ghostly rider who could cover vast distances in a single night, he was often invoked as the explanation for how urgent messages arrived impossibly fast. Some stories claimed he was the spirit of a courier who died mid-journey, forever doomed to complete his mission. Others said he was a mortal blessed by the gods, his horse gifted with wings when the fate of a kingdom hung in the balance. Either way, the Hulk embodied the awe people felt for those who defied distance. Then there's the German legend of Till Eulenspiegel, the trickster who supposedly worked as a messenger for nobles only to sabotage their plans with deliberate misdeliveries or absurd additions to their letters. While likely based on a real itinerant prankster, the tales amplified his exploits into a subversive commentary on the power of information. Every exaggerated story of Till flipping a duke's orders into nonsense reminded audiences that even the mightiest relied on fallible humans to carry their words. In Islamic traditions, the borrowed couriers of the caliphates inspired their own myths. One Persian poem tells of a rider who, racing to warn a city of an impending attack, pushed his horse so hard that the animal's heart gave out, only for the man to run the rest of the way on foot, delivering the message with his last breath. The tale wasn't just about speed, it was a parable of sacrifice, echoing the real risks messengers faced. Even Arthurian legend couldn't resist romanticizing these figures. Sir Gawain, best known as a knight, was also celebrated in Welsh lore as a peerless messenger. In one saga, he navigates a labyrinth of magical traps to deliver a peace offer between warring realms, a clear metaphor for the diplomatic tightropes real couriers walk. And let's not forget Merlin himself, who often acted as a supernatural go-between, blurring the roles of advisor, spy, and messenger. Scandinavian sagas took it further, attributing near-miraculous feats to royal runners. The Hirðmenn, elite Icelandic messengers, were said to recite entire treaties word for word after a single hearing, their memories honed by Odin's wisdom. One Swedish ballad even claims a messenger outran an arrow shot to stop him, a hyperbolic nod to the life or death stakes of their missions. But perhaps the most enduring myth is the Scottish Gaberlunzie, a wandering minstrel messenger hybrid. Folk songs depict him as a beggar by day, a king's confidant by night, carrying secrets in the verses of his ballads. The Gaberlunzie wasn't just a character, he was a personification of how information could hide in plain sight, wrapped in art or disguise. What's fascinating is how these stories reflect real anxieties and ideals. The fear of messages being lost or distorted birthed tales of superhuman reliability. The awe for cross-continental networks inspired myths of otherworldly speed, and the secrecy surrounding couriers. It made them perfect canvas for allegories about trust, deception, and the weight of words. So the next time you picture a medieval messenger, don't just imagine a dusty rider on a road, think of the legends they inspired. Because in a world where information moved at the speed of a galloping horse, those who carried it became larger than life. Now let's step out of the realm of legend and into the hard light of history, where tangible proof of these medieval messenger networks still survives. Across Europe and beyond, archaeologists have uncovered relics that paint a vivid picture of how these systems operated. Proof that the myths we've explored were rooted in very real, very sophisticated infrastructure. Take the remnants of relay stations dotting the old Roman roads. In places like southern France and the Rhineland, excavations reveal small stone buildings spaced roughly 20 miles apart, the exact distance a horse could gallop at full speed before needing rest. These weren't just inns, they were medieval data centers stocked with fresh mounts and couriers ready to hand off messages like a baton in a race. One station near Vienna even preserved a roster carved into clay, listing the names of riders and their scheduled shifts, proving these were highly organized operations. Then there are the letters themselves. In the dry caves of Egypt's Fayoum oasis, archaeologists found a trove of medieval Jewish merchant correspondence, written on fragile parchment yet miraculously intact. These weren't just personal notes, they contained precise timestamps, routes, and even complaints about delayed deliveries, showing a network with standards as rigorous as any modern postal service. One letter from a trader in Cairo ends with a frustrated postscript. "This is the third copy I've sent. If the first two reached you, burn them." Perhaps the most striking evidence comes from the frozen north. Beneath the floorboards of a Hanseatic merchant's house in Pigeon, Norway, researchers uncovered a bundle of wax tablets, medieval instant messages. Scratched into the wax were orders like, "Send 12 barrels of herring to Bruges by Thursday," or "The king's men are inspecting the docks, delay the shipment." These weren't just shopping lists, they were the encrypted tweets of their day, proof that commerce and espionage rode the same courier networks. Even the humble Pigeon left its mark. In the ruins of a Crusader fortress in Syria, archaeologists found clay cylinders still lined with pigeon droppings, remnants of rooftop lofts where birds carried military dispatches. Chemical analysis revealed traces of iron-rich feed, likely used to strengthen the birds for long flights. Nearby, a scrap of vellum bore a faded but urgent warning: Saracens approaching from the east, with tiny holes where it might have been tied to a bird's leg. But perhaps nothing underscores the scale of these networks like the Byzantine Droman ships. Wreckages found off the coast of Crete reveal vessels built for speed, not cargo. Their hulls sleek, their holds empty except for wax-sealed message tubes. These were the fiber optic cables of their era, carrying imperial decrees from Constantinople to Venice in days, not weeks. One tube recovered from the seabed still contained a contract for a mercenary army, its parchment stamped with the emperor's seal, proof that some messages were too vital to trust to roads alone. What's remarkable isn't just that these systems existed, but how closely they mirror our own. The Hanseatic wax tablets, think encrypted emails, the Byzantine message ships. They're the medieval equivalent of undersea data cables. Even the pigeon posts functioned like wireless networks, transmitting updates in near real time. So while the myths gave us larger-than-life heroes, archaeology gives us something equally valuable: the nuts and bolts of how information truly moved. And as we'll see next, these networks didn't just carry messages, they carried the fate of nations. But let's widen the lens for a moment and look beyond Europe. While medieval kingdoms were perfecting their messenger networks, empires in Asia were building systems so advanced they put the West to shame. Take the Mongol Yam, for example, the nerve center of Genghis Khan's empire. Picture this, a relay network stretching from the steppes of Mongolia to the gates of Hungary, with stations placed every 25 miles. But here's where it gets impressive. Unlike European couriers who might wait hours for a fresh horse, Yam riders had mounts ready at all times. The rules were brutal. If a horse died from exhaustion, the rider had to keep going on foot. Delays weren't just frowned upon, they could cost you your life. Now, shift your gaze to China's imperial post, a system so refined it had bureaucrats shaking their heads in envy. As early as the Han Dynasty, 2,000 years ago, the Chinese had standardized courier speeds. A message marked ordinary moved at a leisurely pace, around 100 miles a day. But stamp it urgent, and that same message could cover 300 miles in 24 hours, thanks to relay riders who swapped out every 6 miles. They even had a primitive tracking system, bamboo slips notched with arrival and departure times, making lost messages nearly impossible. What's fascinating is how these systems mirrored each other across continents. The Mongols, like the Byzantines, prioritized military dispatches. Their yam riders carried paisas, gold or silver tablets that acted as all-access passes. Show one, and every village had to provide food, horses, and shelter. Meanwhile, China's couriers, much like the Hanseatic merchants, doubled as spies. Officials in the Ming dynasty would hide coded reports in hollowed-out staffs or false-bottomed carts. But here's the kicker: these networks didn't just exist in parallel, they collided. When Marco Polo traveled the Silk Road, he marveled at the yam's efficiency, calling it a miracle of speed. Yet back home in Venice, messages still crawled along at a fraction of that pace. It's a stark reminder that while Europe debated theology in cloisters, Asia was perfecting logistics on an unimaginable scale. So what set these systems apart? Geography played a role. The Mongols needed speed to control vast open plains, while China's dense bureaucracy demanded precision. But the real difference? Vision. Where European networks often served kings or merchants, Asian systems were state projects designed to bind empires together. The yam didn't just carry messages, it was the glue holding the largest land empire in history intact. And that's the untold story here. These weren't just rival systems, they were competing blueprints for how to rule the world. Which brings us to the darkest chapter of all: how these networks didn't just transmit information, they weaponized it. Now let's step back and connect the dots. These medieval messenger networks weren't just clever solutions, they were the lifeblood of empires, the silent architects of history. From the monastic scribes of Europe to the yam riders of Mongolia, these systems didn't just move information, they shaped the fate of nations. Kings rose and fell by the speed of a courier's horse. Wars were won or lost based on who intercepted a single message. Trade routes flourished because merchants could trust their letters would arrive. What's truly remarkable is how familiar it all feels. Swap out horse relays for fiber optic cables, and you've got the same game playing out today. The hunger for instant communication, the need for secrecy, even the fear of espionage, none of this is new. Our digital age didn't invent these challenges, it just gave them a faster pulse. So the next time you send a text or scroll through news alerts, remember the hidden lineage behind that instant connection. Those medieval messengers, whether they were monks, merchants, or Mongol riders, built the first blueprint for the world we live in now. They proved something timeless: information isn't just power, it's the glue that holds civilizations together. If you found this dive into history's hidden networks as fascinating as we did, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe, and ring the bell so you never miss out on untold stories like these. Because history isn't just about the past, it's the code that explains our present. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next adventure.